Okay.
We'll just wait for another minute and get started.
Thank you for joining us. Okay.
All right.
Hello. Let's get started now.
All right.
Hello. Namaste and happy Gender Equality Month, everyone. It's Women's Day tomorrow, as well as Holi, the Indian Festival of Colors. How apt as we all get represented. My name is Ipshita Banerjee, and I work at the United States Energy Association for the Energy Utility Partnership as the global communicator and engendering lead. I identify as a strategic communicator for positive developmental impact and action, and actively work in increasing gender championing and participation in climate and energy. My pronouns are she and her, and adjective troublemaker. Today is about action, ambition, and being bold to embrace equity. We are at a critical inflection point, what Charles Dickens would call the best of times and the worst of times. Countries continue to struggle from devastating effects of climate change, COVID-19, war, digital divides, and power blackouts, making women and girls suffer more hardships than ever before. With the impending doom or possibility of us being pulled back from decades of action, it is your time, it is my time, and it is our time to be the collective voice of reason, the collective voice that reminds us that we cannot leave large number of people behind from the decision-making table when we resolve for change. We have to embrace equity, and we will do it with pride. And it's time for us to accept that the crisis that we are in did not happen by chance, but we can fix it with a plan. Today's high-level policy dialogue, Women Leaders Breaking Barriers for Gender Equity, is a step to change that narrative that has been holding us back from a more equal world. In our celebration today of women's leadership achievements, we are collectively representing intergovernmental and multilateral organizations, regulatory bodies, energy and climate justice, power utilities, government agencies, regional development bank, and civil society bodies. We're seeking answers to questions on equity and how equity can be truly achieved through practical examples and real-life stories of both individual and organizational level action. It's our celebration of diverse female voices worldwide and hearing how they shape the narrative on energy and climate policy for the people and planet with affirmative action. We can all learn together. Our program today is in partnership with USAID, or the United States Agency for International Development. For those of you who are going to be posting through your social media channels, make sure to tag our Twitter handle at US Energy ASSN and also USAID, which is at the rate of USAID. On LinkedIn, you will find us as at the rate of United States Energy Association. And while posting, use the hashtag #EmbraceEquity. The program agenda and speaker bio notes will all be shared on the chat window, and we are recording this webinar. With this, let's dive into our excellent lineup of speakers. I start by introducing our first speaker and my wonderful colleague, Ms. Sheila Hollis, Acting Executive Director of the United States Energy Association. Sheila served as the first woman president of the Energy Bar Association, chaired ABA's section of Environment, Energy, and Resources, and served as its representative on the ABA Board of Governors. She has been the recipient of several honors and awards over her career. She was named one of Washington, D.C.'s top 100 lawyers overall and one of the top 50 women in Washington's super lawyers. Thank God she leads our team at USEA. Sheila, over to you.
Thank you so much, Epshita. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you all over the world. And thank you so much for joining us for this exceptional conversation today from around the world. Happy Gender Month to all of us. It's also the day before Women's Day, so happy Women's Day as well. This month and the day belongs to everyone everywhere, really. We are celebrating the future world that can be free of bias, discrimination, and stereotypes. Today's high-level policy dialogue is entitled Women Leaders, Breaking Barriers for Gender Equity. It highlights and celebrates the contribution of exceptional women in energy, climate, and policy. These leaders have enabled the conversation on gender equity and equality to achieve the best possible results in development, economic progress, and social inclusion. It also allows us an opportunity to collectively embrace equity as we expand our knowledge by reflecting on successes and progress in promoting gender equality at organizational and individual levels. These strides are achieved by the collective efforts of diverse stakeholders: government, policymakers, civil society, foundations, funding agencies, researchers, educators, and numerous others, as well as every woman involved. My name is Sheila Hollis. I'm the Acting Executive Director of the U.S. Energy Association. Our goal at USEA is to convene, to educate, and to provide a nonpartisan forum for the energy industry, much like this one. Internationally, we support energy development by expanding access to affordable, safe, sustainable energy in partnership with the U.S. government and other public and private stakeholders to support a just energy transition while helping to decarbonize the energy sector. Our largest partner is the U.S. Agency for International Development. Together, we collaborate and provide capacity building assistance to overseas partners for increased energy security and access. Gender equity and social inclusion are our fundamental cross-cutting priorities, and they are central to all of our development efforts across all sectors. Today is our prerogative to offer a chance to celebrate diverse female voices from all throughout the world and climate policy, and hear how climate and energy policy will speed ultimate parity. The presenters' knowledge, experiences, gender inclusive actions at their individual, organizational, and national, regional, and global levels will all be shared in this forum, and even afterwards through a fact sheet that we will share with all of you later this month. Over the next hour or so, I want you to remember this number, 22%. That is the percentage of women in energy production and distribution jobs globally. In renewable energy, women make up about 32% of the workforce. However, a far larger percentage of women make up the climate vulnerable sector, with 48% percentage participation in agriculture. Traditionally, the energy sector has been male dominated. Women have been constrained and forced to the roles to adapt and respond to climate change in this ever-heating planet. If we close the gender gap, women everywhere can get more involved and help our societies adapt with inclusive solutions, not just in energy, but industries, technology, sustainable growth, healthcare, and poverty reduction, and create economies that prosper and thrive with more green jobs and sustainable financial solutions. I know we have miles to cover, many miles before we sleep, to achieve gender parity, but every action we take counts. At USEA, not only is our workforce representation very gender evolved and diverse, but we also understand the importance of spotlighting women, forging change, empowering lives and livelihoods. Thus, we're here today. Since 2016, USEA's Energy Utility Partnership Program has hosted a different global woman leader each month who has demonstrated exemplary leadership in the energy sector and is fighting for gender equity in their own way through their career. Today's forum, in many ways, is a culmination of the Women in Energy monthly feature and our commitment to expand our efforts to accelerate gender equity and inclusion. I've taken enough of your time, No, and I thank you once again for joining us, and we welcome you today to today's program highlight, a keynote address by Damilola Ogunbiyi, CEO and Special Representative to the United States, United Nations Secretary General for Sustainable Energy for All and co-chair for UN Energy. She is a global leader and advocates for sustainable development, Goal 7 in particular, which calls for access to reliable, affordable, sustainable, and modern energy for all by 2030. She is a firm believer in the importance of gender equality being at the heart of the sustainable energy solutions, and is fighting the good fight for inclusive energy progress. While her calendar didn't allow for us to join her in person, we are absolutely delighted that she took the time to share some of her thoughts with us today in an intense, interesting recorded message. So without further ado, Epshita, let's hear the recorded announcement. Thanks.
Thank you, Sheila. Your remarks have humbled us and we're deeply inspired. Peter, can you help us get the recorded message in?
Distinguished guests, it is my pleasure to be speaking with you all today. I'd like to thank the organizers for convening this important event. Women's leadership is integral to addressing climate change and sustainable development in a systematic way, and I welcome the sustained push from USAID. The adoption of gender perspectives ensures that decisions made not only address gender inequality, but have far-reaching positive impacts on people and societies. Addressing gender issues offers potential gains across a number of sustainable development goals, notably those linked to poverty, health and well-being, education, gender equality, energy, and of course, climate change. Unfortunately, COVID-19 reversed many gains and brought to the fore gender inequalities. In a post-pandemic world, we continue to see a rise in backsliding on gender equality policies across sectors. More needs to be done if we are to achieve gender equality and social inclusion. Ladies and gentlemen, women are disproportionately impacted by the lack of access to energy. Today, 1/3 of the global population remains without access to clean cooking. The use of inefficient, polluting fuels and technologies is a high risk and a major contributor to diseases and deaths, particularly for women and children in low and medium income countries. Household air pollution is responsible for an estimated 3.2 million deaths per year, including over 237,000 deaths of children under the age of 5. We therefore cannot leave these underserved populations behind in an effort to address climate change. Bridging energy access gaps must be at the heart of the clean energy transition. We need women to bring their perspectives to forge a more innovative path forward and to build climate adaptation solutions that fully address their specific needs and challenges. The energy sector is behind others in terms of gender balance, representing only 22% of the workforce comprising of women. Women in the sector are also underrepresented in decision-making roles, with less than 35% of board members and directors globally being women. Women in the energy sector lack access to support networks, role models, and champions to help advance their careers and realize their goals. Though there is still much to be done, we continue to see many initiatives being developed could create spaces for women to advance in their careers and advocate for systematic change. At Sustainable Energy for All, we put gender equality at the heart of our work in meeting Sustainable Development Goal 7 by enhancing women's full participation in sustainable energy solutions at every level. Our Women at the Forefront program aims to expand professional opportunities for women in the energy workforce and supports and champions the next generation of female energy leaders. We do this by providing mentorship, technical training, internships, and sponsorship opportunities. Ladies and gentlemen, we must collectively invest in women and their potential, bring more women to the decision-making table, and increase their participation in all sectors to ensure that they play an active role in shaping the future we want to all see. We have a tall order, but I'm confident that we can inspire, empower, and create opportunities for more women to become sustainable development leaders. Thank you for your interest and your attention, and I wish you very productive deliberations.
Thank you, Ms. Ogunboyi and the entire SE for All team for this support. I'm sure that we all understand and agree that this is what choosing equity looks like. Now let's zoom in a little on the US government action. Our next speaker, Kristen Madler, is the Clean Energy Coordinator at the United States Agency for International Development. USAID works as a catalytic actor for developmental results and helps US national security and economic prosperity, demonstrates American generosity, and promotes a path to recipient self-reliance. Kristen's work, excuse me, prioritizes emerging markets to scale up and integrate renewable energy into the grid. USEA has been working with USAID and Kristen for a long time now to enable utilities to accelerate digital transformation, grid modernization, create energy markets, the integration of best practices to manage cybersecurity, so on and so forth. Kristen, we're very delighted that you joined us here today. But before we start, it is important that I also point out that for USAID, gender equality and social inclusion of the marginalized is a cross-cutting priority across all sectors, thematic and programmatic areas. Clean energy and climate is no different. Kristen, why don't you take us through the opportunities that engendering programming opens us for all?
Thank you so much, Ipshita. And thank you to Damilola and Sheila for your very inspiring words. So gender equality and women's and girls' empowerment are fundamental for the realization of human rights and key to building safer, healthier, and more prosperous communities. USAID is committed to increasing its investments and expanding its partnerships to expand and advance these aims globally. And last November at COP27, USAID announced 2 significant programs to advance gender-responsive climate action. First, a $21.8 million fund dedicated to gender-responsive climate action from the Gender Equity and Equality Action Fund surpassed its $14 million COP26 commitment. And this includes funding for organizations working in over 37 countries to address gender-based violence connected to climate, support to national governments to increase gender equality in their national climate commitments, and programs that advance green jobs for women and gender-smart climate information services. And next, through USAID's Climate Finance Development Accelerator mechanism, also known as CFDA, USAID announced the launch of its new Climate Gender Equity Fund, which will leverage the private sector funding to scale climate finance that advances gender equitable climate action. USAID and online retailer Amazon announced a new 5-year partnership with initial seed funding of $6 million to establish the Climate Gender Equity Fund. And this new initiative will increase access to climate finance for women-led climate organizations, as well as businesses that advance gender equitable climate solutions in the least developed countries around the world. USAID and Amazon will work together to secure at least $60 million in additional funding and invite others to join us in advancing this critical issue. And at USAID, I work in the Bureau for Development, Democracy, and Innovation, USAID's central resource for providing technical assistance to its global field offices, also known as missions, on a number of development challenges across sectors. And my colleagues and I in the Environment, Energy, and Infrastructure Center focus on 3 broad priorities: climate policy, climate integration, and climate mitigation to support USAID's climate strategy released last year. Through strategic partnerships and by providing world-class technical expertise, we partner with countries to achieve a just energy transition, urgent emission reductions, sustainable urban development, conservation and biodiversity, and tackle air and ocean plastic pollution. And the energy team that I sit on, we work to connect people to power and aim to light up the lives and livelihoods of over 2.2 billion people globally who still lack access to reliable power. To continue achieving USAID's bold climate ambitions, energy access, and energy security goals in partner countries, we need to ensure our work garners the best development results. Gender equality and social inclusion are fundamental cross-cutting priorities central to all of our development efforts. There is a strong gender dimension to energy poverty, and a lack of access to energy is an obstacle to women and girls' well-being and economic prosperity. USAID is using targeted approaches to reduce these gender gaps, like integrating and mainstreaming gender equity and social inclusion at the project level throughout our project management cycle. USAID's global energy portfolio embraces equity to help increase the efficacy of our investments and interventions. Activities support women's participation in the workforce and preparation for senior leadership roles, access to finance, gender-informed energy policies, and mobilization of capital with a gender lens as short and medium-term objectives. And in the long term, projects contribute to international, regional, and national development policies, NDCs, net zero plans, and commitments in USAID partner countries. For gender equity and social inclusion, or GESI, a one-size-fits-all approach does not work at the project intervention level. So when designing global energy projects, analyses are conducted to identify the most viable project-level interventions to achieve positive change for women and other underrepresented and marginalized groups. We then carefully monitor and evaluate performance against these targets and adapt as needed. And as mentioned earlier, women only account for 22% of the traditional energy sector and 32% of the renewable energy workforce, in spite of making up 39% of the global workforce and despite being primary users of energy in most households globally. It is widely recognized that companies with more gender diversity are more profitable, innovative, and resilient. And this is true in the energy sector just as in other sectors. An analysis of 200 energy utilities discovered that the top 20 gender diverse utilities significantly outperformed the bottom 20 when it came to return on equity. USAID has been working to increase women's economic opportunities in the energy sector for many years. USAID's Engendering Industries project shows that gender equality interventions can produce real meaningful change. Engendering Industries works with 98 partners in 38 countries through its intensive and accelerated programs driving gender equality in male-dominated sectors, including the energy sector. Engendering Industries partners have hired more than 2,400 women, promoted more than 2,500 women, and trained more than 37,000 women on technical and soft skills to advance their careers. The program is also helping to ensure its energy sector partners' transition to clean energy is inclusive. And through all of our projects with the United States Energy Association under the Energy Utility Partnership Program and Advancing Modern Power through Utility Partnerships, we encourage female participation in technical training through our volunteer peer-to-peer partnerships in more than 40 countries around the world. And for more than 30 years, established female leaders and mentors have shared their expertise and practical experience from the government and private sector with our USAID partners. So next, as we move into our impressive panel discussion and hear real-life examples of policy action from global leaders, I want to leave you with one thought: ensuring that all people, regardless of gender, have the opportunity to realize their full potential is both of moral and of strategic significance for all of us. A growing body of evidence demonstrates a strong correlation between gender diversity and a company's financial performance. Across multiple sectors all around the world, organizations and companies with a greater share of women on their boards and in senior management see higher returns on investment. Let's continue to support larger talent pools, employ individuals who better reflect a utility's customer base, and demonstrate more balanced decision-making to contribute to improved performance and to achieve powerful results. Ipshita, I will turn it back over to you. Thank you so much for all your work in organizing today's event.
Thank you, Kristen. Woo, that was powerful. So now as we move out of talking about gender equity and social inclusion and what USAID is doing to make it more measurable for transparency and accountability, we're going to take a quick wellness break, and then we would come back with a panel discussion. We know we're doing a lot of things differently today, but we want to be a little different here as well. Peter, can you cue up a quick video before we take a break? Thank you, Peter. We'll take a quick wellness break for about 2 minutes, and then we will come back and reconvene with the panel discussion. Thank you. Peter, we can kind of get started. So. Okay. Welcome back to our panel discussion on women leaders taking affirmative action on gender equity. Let's also take a moment to clarify what affirmative action means to us. Affirmative action has had a long history of evolution, and in our programmatic context, it stands united with policies and action to promote women and to reduce overall widening gaps in gender inequalities, but with special emphasis on clean energy and climate that pertains to today's topic. We're looking at affirmative opportunities and not preferences or quotas. Gender is not just a discipline or an old debate. It has been a weapon that has been used historically to invisibilize a part of our society and workforce, therefore reducing our overall rate of winning or succeeding in any goal. We're at the halfway mark to meet the 2030 deadline to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, with gender equality as goal 5. And it's true that a recent UN report says that at the current pace of action, it will take us 300 years to achieve equality. I'm a millennial. I do not have 300 years to wait. You do not have 300 years to wait. We know our purpose. We are going to embrace equity to make equality and inclusion a tangible goal and do not accept historic invisibilization. We now move into our panel with our distinguished global panelists, and we would like if all the panelists could switch their camera on. Aarti Khosla, the panel chair, will advance this session and introduce the panelists. Aarti is the founder and director of Climate Trends. She's an experienced communicator working at the intersection of strategic communications and policy outreach to bring attention to climate. Her startup called Carbon Copy has a team effort to offer latest news and updates on climate and energy issues from India to the world. I would also like to go over some of the house rules real quick. Peter, if you could get that slide up. The speaker bio notes have been shared in the chat window. Audio and video are disabled for participants by default. Please use the chat window for any general remarks. Use the Q&A option to type in your questions and also mention to whom in the panel you're addressing your question to. The speakers, panelists will try to respond to the question in the chat window if time permits, or they'll probably respond on a later date via email, and we'll try to work that out. In case you're unable to hear or view the presentations that are going on, please wait for the connections to be reestablished. Alternatively, you can leave the meeting and try reconnecting. Aarti, over to you.
Thanks very much, Ipshita, and very pleased to be here. I think it was quite insightful to hear Madam Sheila Hollis also talk about the subject. And, it's a statistic which you referred to on how we have 48% of women in agriculture and about 33% in renewable energy as well. And one way to look at it is also to see how inclusive or equal opportunity the traditional sector of agriculture has been, and how much even the new energy sector has to be inclusive if we have to see any form of climate action which brings a regime which is not as unjust as the previous one was. But I thought I will only preface the rest of the 45 minutes on the statistic that you shared, and thanks very much for that. This panel discussion is on a topic which, to be honest, needs little introduction. Some of you have spoken about it now, but this is also what half of humanity lives and breathes one way or another. We've all heard and we all experience that gender equalities are still deep-rooted in several societies, some more than others. I would only say that the vital importance of women in social fabric is clearly yet to be fully understood as being at par in many cultures that we come from. I read a report which showed that it will take 135 years for the gender gap to be closed. If I'm not wrong, it's the World Economic Forum. Without any judgments on it, if you ask some women in parts of the world, the 145 years or 150 years don't ring true. The realities are much, much farther away. Of course, there are social norms and stereotypes as well, which tend to add to these barriers. And if I'm allowed, I will say that very recently, a video of a very well-known woman CEO popped up on my social media feed, where she normalizes her primary role at home being one of a mother and a daughter, and of doing household chores because she must and because she's expected to do that when she is in the house. It is not whether this is good or bad, and this house is not the one to pass a judgment on, but it is definitely true that these stereotypes are deeply, deeply ingrained, not just among the men, but sometimes also among women. And I think at the same time, while we say much progress has been made to have women in leadership positions, it just also feels that living day-to-day life as equal human beings and with respect is far more important than just breaking the glass ceiling at some point. I will stop my philosophy at this moment. I mostly wanted to set some context of what we would like to discuss in the next half an hour and 40 minutes. We have a very esteemed panel, and I would like to share their insights with all of us as we go talking. Let me just reiterate some of the house rules that Ipshita mentioned. May I request, when we start discussing, may I request all the panelists when they make their interventions to limit it to 2 to 3 minutes in the beginning, and we will try and come back afterwards. If participants are posing questions, please do address your question to a particular panelist, and in that way, we will try and come back to you afterwards. And I know that if I am exceeding time limit or talking too much, then somebody will point it out to me as well. Without further ado, I do want to take the pleasure of introducing to all of you our very experienced and esteemed colleagues who are on the panel. May I please thank Commissioner Alison Clements for joining us. Commissioner Clements has 2 decades of public and private sector experience in energy regulation and policy, and she's represented utilities, independent power producers, philanthropic organizations, nonprofits on grid policy issues. She is the founder and president of Good Grid, an energy policy and strategy consulting firm. Comes with diverse experience of having spent even a decade at NRDC as their corporate counsel, and is a visiting faculty at Yale Law School. Welcome, Commissioner Clements. We have Samantha Hung. Samantha is the Chief of Gender Equality Thematic Group at the Asian Development Bank, where her job is to provide leadership for advancing gender equality around all aspects of the bank's operations and knowledge network. Samantha has over 2 decades of experience in gender equality at project, policy, at program level. And before joining the ADB in 2009, she held various gender specialist roles, including at the New Zealand Agency for International Development, the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat, UNICEF, as well as the UK Institute of Development Studies. Welcome once again, Samantha. We also have Ms. Flavia Aniko, who is the head of risk management at Uganda Electricity Generation Company. Flavia has held several responsible positions at the organization, which are around development and implementation of the risk management strategy, policies, programs, systems, and procedures. She's committed to mentoring young people and is a member for Girls project in Uganda, as well as the Global Women's Network for Energy Transition. Very pleased to have you with us, Flavia. We have Ms. Cora Topfer, who's the head of German Public and Regulatory Affairs at EPEX spot, which is a European power exchange situated in Paris. Her main focus lies on national and European electricity market design, market integration of renewable energy, and flexibility markets. She has also worked for the German Ministry of Energy. Because this group is quite aligned with what we talk about climate action being as a real thing, and a lot of you have wealth of experience working in the energy sector. I think some of us who work on the subject of climate change also realize how climate impacts are foundationally determined by one's socioeconomic position in the first place and exacerbated by pre-existing inequalities. And one such inequality is of gender. And I think that's the spine of what will bind us for the next half an hour as we share our experiences from different parts of the world, but we try and bring some unified message on how we cannot talk about climate action without being also gender inclusive. I will press ahead, and my first question is to Commissioner Clements. Ma'am, I would like to ask you, especially in the context of the COVID pandemic and how it dramatically changed the workplace environment. Practically overnight, millions suddenly found themselves working from home, the work ethics changed, your life is turned into a remote mode, you never switch off your computer, so on and so forth. But at the same time, some changes which were considered temporary then became the new norm, and hybrid work schedule is now part of everybody's lives. I wanted to ask you one, what do you think, if at all, the pandemic has taught us in terms of policies which we should also promote in the workplace which bring gender equity?
Thank you so much for that nice introduction, and to all of you, Sheila, and your team. And what an inspiring way to start the day here in Washington, D.C. with this esteemed group of women, especially the day before International Women's Day. So thank you. And I do want to caveat all my remarks to the fact that my experience has been in a professional capacity in the U.S. And so that's my experience. And we think
Secretary Clements, I think we lost your audio.
About the impacts of COVID on people around the world. I certainly can't speak to some.
Can others hear Secretary Clements? Because I seem to be losing audio.
The connection is breaking. We will give her a second, and I think...
Apologies. Can you hear me?
Much better.
Yes,
Secretary.
you should try.
Sorry about that. In any case, my experience in the US at a high level has been that there are a few silver linings to COVID. There is this fact that we have found workplace flexibility. For women in particular, getting your work done when it works for you is a real benefit. The fact that now hybrid schedules are normal and understood is a real benefit to a working mom, especially like me and many of my colleagues. It's a benefit to not have to travel as often for meetings that we would otherwise have to do. It's a benefit that women have a voice on the screen, the same size box as everybody else in the meeting, and then perhaps have an opportunity to speak. Of course, the bigger underlying tragedy is that COVID disproportionately impacted vulnerable communities and women. And women were 2/3 of caregivers for parents' care, for children's care, for other types of care, and disproportionately left the workforce. We're still now, men's numbers in the US have normalized back to where they were pre-COVID. Women are still down, I think, 13 million women from the workforce. There's a lot of implications that I worry about professionally, and things like the growth opportunities that young women especially, missed out during this time. Finding mentors, seeing those mentors in person, getting to know them on a personal level, having a gap in their resume for the time they left, and having to explain it, because we're all sympathetic right now. But if you're a guy 10 years from now interviewing that person, did they get off track? Did they miss chances? At my own agency, the federal agency, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, COVID started before I got there, and we had two successive chairs who did an excellent job of transitioning our workforce to home. Really received accolades across the federal government for those efforts, largely kept a strong morale at the commission. But I will say, to the point you just made, the staff really felt, and over time felt increasingly worn down by the fact that their videos never turned off and that they could be expected to answer at all times of the day. I think we're still trying to figure out how to come back from that just tired state that many women have been feeling around the country. So I guess that's my initial perspective.
Thanks very much, Commissioner Clements. Can I ask you, Samantha, to weigh in on this aspect a little bit more, given how COVID-19 has really changed the course of this century, if I can say that. It just feels that there will be new challenges that everybody will face as a result of the pandemic. And I wanted to ask if you feel that there are any challenges which women are particularly facing as a result of the pandemic that we should be more aware of as we talk about inclusivity going forward.
Thank you very much, Arti, and it's a real pleasure to be here. I think maybe just to complement the perspectives of others on the panel, I'll speak on the behalf of developing Asia, which is really the region that I work for. And I think it's important to note that even before the pandemic, despite Asia's dynamic economics, which is highly praised globally, that we actually were the only region in the world that had a declining female labor force participation rate, even before the pandemic hit. And that was for a range of different reasons. But some of the features are that there was very significant gender job segregation. Women tended to be employed in more precarious sectors, more representation in the informal sector, and with a higher gender pay gap. In terms of automation in the region, that also poses greater risk to women's jobs, and that automation was more likely to automate away women's jobs. Also, women played a very high role in the care economy, and they worked the longest hours in the world, and also coupled with low representation in leadership and influencing policy. So fast forward to COVID, I think we all know that a lot of the sectors that were heavily impacted, such as tourism, manufacturing, had a high proportion of female labor force participation as well. So in some ways, we all know about the disproportionate impacts, but what's disappointing is that the data is still limited, but we are starting to see that even post-pandemic, in some of the new jobs that are coming back, women aren't necessarily in a better position, or are they necessarily able to access the kind of support mechanisms. So what does that mean? I guess it means that we can't take economics for granted, and we need much more intentional interventions to really put women ahead of the curve for the jobs of the future. So that means green skills, it means digital skills, it means more investment in STEM and tackling the enabling environment that are the barriers for women, one of which is actually the care economy. So I would say a lot more investment in those kinds of enabling barriers, such as equitable, affordable, and quality childcare. I think that's a really, really big barrier. And also just having proactive quotas. I mean, that's the kind of thing ADB does a lot. So in a lot of our projects, whether it be in the energy sector or transport sector, we proactively promote women and train women to non-traditional jobs and equip them with the skills. So I think it's not a simple answer, but we heard about some of the renewable energy statistics before, 30% of women in the renewable energy sector, a low proportion in the energy sector across the board. But if you look at the rapid pace of green jobs, a lot of which will be in Asia, if we don't equip women and girls now with the right upskilling and the investment, we're not going to enable them to really reap from the benefits that the green economy will offer. So maybe I'll just pause there. Thank you.
Very insightful, and I really like how you say that when the new jobs are coming back, women are not in a better position. And whatever those intentional interventions have to be, it just feels that a lot needs to happen right now, not when the train has left the station. This is that moment to course correct a little bit. I believe this year's theme of International Women's Day is also digital skills. And, the part of the world that I come from, I also live and work in Asia, and we hear a lot of how sometimes even women journalists are biased, and that's a part of my role on engaging with that community. And they just face more discrimination of their work as opposed to their male counterparts. So that's also just in terms of traditional sectors, but when we're looking at non-traditional, it becomes far more complicated. I will keep moving. I think we will be coming back and weaving some of the insights and reflections you all are sharing. But may I invite you, Cora, to share your thoughts, especially on, you also work in a policy framework, and with your experiences in Europe, which can be very different from the global South, which are very different from the global South. I wanted to understand from you, which kind of equity policies and frameworks and practices are the ones that actually make an impact?
Yes, thanks, Arti, and thanks a lot for the invitation to today's panel discussion. I would like to highlight two elements that seem crucial to me. So the one is modern corporate working cultures. And I would like to give some examples from the European Power Exchange, the company I work for. Just to give you an idea, so we have about 35% of women in the overall workforce, and this percentage is also representative in the senior management, so meaning at director and head of level. And we stand above the French energy sector average in terms of gender equity, because in France, there is a regulatory provision. Every company above a certain number of employees has to publish a gender equality index on their website. So you can go on the website of EDF or of ENGIE, and you will find their gender equity index. And from IPEX side, we have an index of 91 points of 100 points. The average energy sector index is 86 points. And it's based on several indicators like promotions between men and women, the gender pay gap, of course, as well. And so yeah, what do we do? And there are some examples I would like to share. So, for example, we have in place already well before regulatory requirements started. We have in place for almost 10 years now a corporate or a company agreement with the staff representatives on gender equity. And this company agreement, for example, or amongst others, foresees an annual budget for salary increases for women to close or reduce the gender pay gap. And also something that has already also been already addressed, we have very flexible working hours, very flexible home office rules, for example. We had this already in place well before COVID started. Also we have a dedicated human resources process in place for parents returning from parental leave. And I always found this, the 2 times I returned from a parental leave, I always found this very useful because it supports a quick and smooth reintegration to the company. And this in particular in our, the energy sector and power trading is a very fast moving dynamic sector. So it's really useful to have this reintegration processes. And then we also have different, or the company also fosters networking among women. Of course, this does not directly reduce the gender pay gap, for example. So we also have still some work to do. But networking is so crucial to learn from each other, to promote each other. So I really found this very useful. So for example, tomorrow we have a ladies' lunch organized on the occasion of the World Women's Day. And in addition to modern corporate working cultures, I find very important also to have supportive regulation in place. And in particular, to have quota regulations for women in upper management positions. And the pure figures, I think they show that these kind of regulations can be very successful. And yeah, unfortunately, in the past, voluntary commitments by industry, they did not deliver the sufficient or satisfying results. And there are some promising examples. So, for example, last year, the European Union, they passed a gender equality directive, and that now foresees that all big publicly listed companies, they have to have the target of 40% of non-executive director posts that go to the underrepresented sex. So that's it from my side so far.
Thanks very much, Cora. I think important on how strategic and policy push is really needed for a successful outcome. We're all well-intentioned and we talk about things, but till the time we don't translate them into actionable steps, we cannot progress. And maybe Flavia, if it's all right, I would like to invite you at this moment. You also come from a culture where not just there is a huge diversity, but there is also different, women can be at different places depending on where they belong. And, there can be several stories and anecdotes to share, and we will be keen to hear at least something from you on what in your experience has been a good way in which individuals or organizations have successfully implemented some of the gender equity policies.
Thank you so much, Arti, and I'm really enjoying the conversation much as a panelist, as well as taking notes from Cora's policies to see what we can also pick up some really interesting insights there. To pick up on your question, in UGCL, I'll speak to one initiative that I have personally found really impactful. About 3 years ago, management was trying to answer the question, how do we get more women involved in the decision-making process? And to answer that question, they enrolled 4 ladies to a training called the Female Future Program. It's a 9-month training program specifically for women with the objective of increasing participation of women in decision-making. And this training looks at addressing gender biases, enabling women understand their own biases and how those might affect with men. And participants on the training also receive training for board competence, public speaking, and leadership. So the first year the training ran, 4 people participated. Then the second year, another 4 people participated. But before we could even enroll a 3rd cohort, the first 2 cohorts came together, and there was this sense of we must pay it forward, and we were able to start a mentorship program in-house to train the ladies who had not yet taken part in that training, but to also get that self-awareness and become able to stand up for themselves, speak up, and begin to occupy spaces that were previously thought, a reserve of men or something like that. And just with that, we've been able to see a lot of participation of women, a lot of promotions at all levels of the company, right from a C-suite, managerial, as well as technical roles as well. We are seeing a lot of active participation of women. So that training was particularly impactful and has had a ripple effect, because now that women are more outspoken, they're beginning to speak to some of the policies and make suggestions to which management is listening and actually committing resources. So that has been one particularly impactful practice here in UGCL. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Flavia. And every time, we discuss gender issues within the broader societal structure, it just feels like we are talking of crisis within a crisis, and pretty much that's what it is. I have a few more questions, and I will just try and bring back some of the conversations, if that's all right. And Samantha, when you talked about emerging Asia, and we all know how disproportionately the impacts to women in this region are, and I wanted to ask you on especially you're working at an organizational level in terms of your role as the thematic lead for gender equity. And it'll be just nice to hear a little bit of what do you think is the culture change that is needed, or how is that culture change even possible to bring, and how do you convince the organization to adopt that culture of equity as a priority across their entire operations to be effective overall?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think every organization has to tailor their approach based on where they're at in the journey, for one, so that it's aspirational, but starting from, every organization is starting from a different place. But at the same time, I think making sure that the incentives are right for the culture of the organization. So if I relate that back to the Asian Development Bank, obviously we are mandated by our member countries, and gender equality and climate are both very high on our priorities. So gender equality and climate change are two of seven thematic priorities, both of which have concrete targets. So both of which 75% of what we do has to directly support gender equality. At the same time, 75% of what we do has to support climate. We've been on the gender journey for longer, and so we've actually overachieved those targets. At the same time, the climate colleagues are trying to reach the colleagues. So there's a natural convergence there. But speaking more to the gender side, what's really been a game changer for us as an institution is having concrete targets which really trickle down. So having a corporate target around gender mainstreaming, that means that every department then, because it gets a little bit, competitive, and they want to be able to report and achieve it, because those kinds of things work in the institution. It trickles down to department, to sector, to project level, to the extent that everyone working in the organization, they know they have to do it. And it's almost like, how do you then lift the game? So as an institution, we're at the level where that's very normalized. But I would like to say we're now at a critical juncture where we need to take it up a notch, that we've gender mainstream well, but the gender issues are still there. So we need to be more transformative, and we actually need to take on Sustainable Development Goal 5's agenda to really tackle the underlying norms that are still inhibiting, and incentivize more transformative designs. And in order to do that, you need different mechanisms, and you also need to have the funding mechanisms that encourage that. So I think it depends, and I'm talking about operations, obviously on the internal side, in terms of our own internal gender equality around staffing, then we have a sort of different mechanisms that we need to approach that. But the two need to mirror each other, and you need to walk the talk, so that when we talk to the clients, we can also talk about what we're doing internally. So it's complex, but I think you need to really be aspirational, but have really good evidence base on where you're starting from. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thanks very much. Good point about the aspirational baseline, to at least be an ambitious enough baseline, and to build on from there, given the time that we have is just limited. We've had the perspective from Asia, and I was wondering, if I can pose one question which Commissioner Clements as well as Cora can respond to, and would like to at least bring your perspectives as well on that. And I was really thinking about the point that was made about clean energy jobs, the need for clean energy jobs in the future, the kind of skills that will be needed, so on and so forth. And it really feels that, especially when you talk about upskilling or providing new skills, or providing the right kind of education for even the clean energy jobs, there is a lot that needs to be done in ensuring that there is inclusivity and parity in terms of how the right skills are also imparted to women to be able to be the workforce of the future. And if I can ask either of you, maybe Cora, you first, on what do you think steps the organizations can take to increase percentage of women in their workforce, especially in technical and leadership jobs? And if that's all right, Commissioner Clements, I will pose the same question to you after this.
Yes, sure. So several points have already been mentioned, and and also in addition to, I mean, modern corporate working cultures and also supportive regulations. Maybe let me highlight another point. So I think it is very important that we communicate convincingly the why. So why do we need to adopt a culture of equity, and to get people on board and to convince this change to be made in the different organizations. And I think the answer is clear, because gender equity leads to better results and more innovation. And I mean, we urgently need all the skills, all the perspectives, all the innovations, also from women in all the different sectors, including technical fields, including also in the leadership positions, to achieve these massive challenges of the climate change, of the energy transition. And also, I mean, if we do not progress on gender equity, we might risk a lack of specialists. And there is, for example, expectations published by the IRENA, International Renewable Energy Agency. They expect until 2050, 42 million of jobs in the renewable energy sector. Today, we are at about 13 million of jobs in this sector. So there will be a massive need of specialists. So this is also another reason why we need to get all these women on board. Yeah, so it's not gender equity, it's not just an end to itself, but yeah, we need them and their innovation. And yeah.
Thanks very much. Commissioner Clements, what is your view?
Well, Cora's point is really important and goes back to what I think Kristen said at the beginning, which is that the reason we're doing this is that outcomes are better, that these very daunting goals we have a better chance at success when we have a diverse set of people in all levels, but especially in leadership, impacting and influencing those decisions. I guess I'd have one concrete suggestion and then just one commentary. And the concrete suggestion is, you know, one of my favorite parts of my job is talking to students. And when you go into a room of students and you tell them that the clean energy sector is going to explode with jobs during their career time, people's eyes light up. That's really exciting. And if there was some sort of convening network that could just, you know, send us, oh, you're going to be in this city on this date. Great. Stop at this school and have that conversation. The same is true. So you might be thinking of four-year universities in that sense, but also technical schools. Technical schools and trade schools are heavily traditionally male. And trying to crack that nut to open those opportunities for women to come in, you know, you see there's lots of good anecdotal examples around solar installation and other jobs, but there's a lot of trades that in which, you know, I read in the paper this week, almost every morning, there's not enough people to fill them. So thinking about how we can really use positions of influence to help inspire the next generation is really important. The commentary is about, this is about change theory. We have to make everybody ready for these types of changes. We have to meet people where they are as it relates to kind of the nuts and bolts changes that might come in an gender equity plan in any given company, or, you know, a DEI plan, or just a specific change in a hiring practice. So I think, you know, thinking about the reality that this doesn't feel natural and top priority for everyone is just a really important thing that I have to remind myself on a regular basis.
Thanks very much. Good point made about, you know, if there was a way to just bring all the knowledge together and be able to pass it on to where there is enthusiasm to be able to absorb it. And, you know, that's true with the amount of new avenues and new opportunities that are also opening up, even from a very limited lens of anybody's worldview. It just feels that there is a lot more opportunity out there in sectors, you know, of development, of climate, of energy, at least the ones that some of us are focusing on when it comes to new kinds of jobs, and things are looking quite different than they were looking 2 to 3 decades ago. The question really is to be able to harness all of that knowledge and to be able to pass it on so that those who need it can at least utilize it while it's still timely. And in the spirit of moving ahead and also being able to keep on time, I do want to ask one last question, if that's all right, to everybody on the panel. And thanks so much for engaging in the conversation so far. All your reflections are not just from an experience of what's needed to be done, but also from the level of practitioners that you all are. And my last question is really a practical question, that while it's fairly rhetorical to talk about principles of JEDI, as we call them, justice, equity, diversity, inclusivity, at the same time, there is something to be done which we believe as individuals. And my question is fairly simple. If we do a rapid, if we do a rapid fire round and ask each one of you to just list your top 3 practical actions that you recommend supporting diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace, what will be your 3 top picks? Anyone can go first, but if not, then I will take the liberty of picking whoever is next on my screen, and that is Samantha at the moment. And after that, Cora, and then Flavia and Commissioner Clements.
Okay, so I'm happy to go. So at a personal level, 3 things I would do. I think you have to just really question your put stops and breaks in your own biases. So the first is like, when I'm hiring, I make a conscious effort that, am I bringing in someone that's different from me and bringing in a different perspective? So gender is obviously one of them, although in my team, we do tend to have a lot of women, but also different backgrounds, ethnicities, etc. The second one, I think, is it's really, the value of mentoring. I mean, we've all benefited from that, but I think it's really also important to mentor up those that come after you. So building the pipeline that follows you, and consciously doing that. And then I think the third one I would say is modeling the inclusive workplace behaviors that are really important. Because I think also when you're really busy as managers, there's so much to do, but I think you also need to be, respectful of the parameters of work-life balance, respectful of people, wherever people are in their life, and making sure that you actually practice the family-friendly workplace balance policies and practices that you want to promote to enable more inclusivity. Those are my 3. Thanks.
Perfect. Cora?
Yes, so I would like to add to this list 3 further points. So my first priority would be to close the unjustified gender pay gap, because equal work needs to be paid in an equal way, and independently of the ability to go negotiate a salary, for example. Second point would be to achieve a fair representation of women in the upper management by establishing or implementing quotas. Because as we have just said, mixed teams, they lead to better results, more innovation, and we need this to achieve the huge challenges that the energy sector faces. And third point would be, goes a little bit into the first point that Samantha mentioned, to keep on fighting stereotypes, the glass ceiling, and what is also known as the unconscious bias. Because for me, it's not so much about direct discrimination anymore, but rather about indirect discrimination based on stereotypes. So for example, women are more often seen as unsympathetic or dogged when they negotiate a salary, unlike men. Or women are also more often interrupted in meetings, even by other women. And so therefore, I think it's really crucial to already educate children about equality between boys and girls and between men and women.
Excellent, Flavia.
Yeah, I entirely agree with Samantha and Cora, but I would just like to add, and this is something that maybe someone in a developed country might not be able to relate to. In our context, we operate plants and develop hydropower projects in regions that are really remote and out of town, far from home, far from your family. And it's not very attractive for women So it's really important that these facilities are improved at both plants and project sites to provide family-friendly accommodation, very comfortable sanitary facilities, childcare, and necessary facilities. Because we have seen at the beginning of our project, you will recruit, you have a certain number of women, but then they get to the site, then they begin thinking like, oh, I'm about to start a family, I can't possibly stay here. And we've lost a lot of staff for that simple reason. So it's a quick fix, but you'd be surprised at how long it takes to close such a gap. Then secondly is about sexual harassment. We tend to have policies that are very difficult to implement because there's no protection for the victims. So enriching these policies such that survivors are protected and discreet and fair handling of these cases is encouraged so that the vice is managed and people feel safe in the workplace. Thank you.
I'm just trying to think about
word on this, Commissioner Clements.
I'm thinking about how Flavia's point on improving facilities relates over to an economy like the US, where they're much less dramatic, but still important needs for changing to make opportunities attractive for women. I'll just list two. One's pretty personal, and that's in your day-to-day. This goes to Samantha's point. Validate and lift up. Do not miss the chance to sit and tell someone they made a good point or they did a good job, whether that person is junior to you, your peer, or senior. When someone calls to ask for ideas to fill a position, don't forget to return that call with lots of good ideas for women who might take it. When there is an award available, nominate somebody for that award. They'll help you do the work if there's work to do. But those are easy things that don't take a lot of change outside of just a personal commitment. And another one, I guess this is also a personal commitment, is look for common ground with people, make connections with people who you might disagree with on policy issues. This might be specific to the policy role I play, but things are very political over here as it relates to energy policy. And I've been really glad that there are a few women out there who have been mentors to me and supporters to me, even though I don't think we probably agree on most policy positions, but they don't pause. They reach out. They say, hope what just happened is good. Nice job on that presentation. Those kind of relationships that allow us to say, yeah, we're two people and we want to solve problems. How we want to solve those problems might be different, but because we're women together, we'll do a better job. And those are probably some of the most invaluable relationships that I've developed over time.
Excellent. Thanks so much. These have been really accurate inputs and insights from all of you. We've covered a lot of ground. What you said, Commissioner Clements, says at the end, appeals as well to basic human interaction as well. And, pretty much right on being able to find common ground with people you disagree with and, is really the first principle of moving one step ahead, but also what everyone else said on hiring right, on mentoring up, like Samantha said, closing the pay gap, very important, equal pay for equal work, like Cora said, having company policy on having women on leadership roles and mentoring them for those roles, and absolutely basic survival type simple stuff like basic facilities at workplace and at sites. And in India there have been examples of how many school dropouts happen when girls attain puberty. And that's not just incidental, it's also just about not having those proper facilities in place. And these are really basic things that we talk on one hand, and on the other hand, we try and look at how women can be in leadership position. We are really looking at across the spectrum. I'm sure all of us can go on a lot more because we really believe in this and we want to make a contribution through whatever we are doing in all of this. But I'm afraid time is short. At this moment, I will pause. I would really personally like to thank all the panelists here who have joined us at various times of the day. And before I end, may I apologize to our attendees where some of the audience questions we've not been able to respond. I know that Ipshita and the organizers will take a note if your question was for a particular panelist, and we will try and get the answer back to you. thanks so much once again. Wish you a very happy Women's Day, and I will pass on to Ipshita for the rest of the proceedings, but not before requesting everybody to open their cameras, the panelists, so we can take I have still not come into the habit of calling this a group photo, but for what it's worth, one screenshot.
Sarah, can we also have you on? Thank you, Peter, for coming on as well. Thanks, Marjorie. Quick photograph. Excellent. Hannah?
We have Sheila come on as well.
Yeah, Peter, can we have Sheila come on as well? Hannah? Kristen? Thank you. Okay. Thank you, everyone. That was an excellent panel. It was engaging. It was focused. We covered a lot of ground. And I couldn't be more grateful because we did run over a little bit, but it stayed delightfully intimate and we could honestly keep chatting on this forever. Special thanks to Commissioner Clemens, Samantha, Flavia, Cora, and Aarti. Our next speaker is Hannah Vizcara, Senior Attorney, National Climate at Earth Justice. Thank you for honoring us with your presentation, Hannah. Hannah works in advancing progress on addressing climate change and protecting public health and the environment through legal advocacy. Before becoming an attorney, Hannah worked in political research roles for campaign and labor organizations. She is the volunteer board member for Women's Council for Energy and the Environment. Hannah will present on legal advocacy for gender equity and climate change, as well as the value of supporting professional women's networks. Hannah?
Thank you. It's so wonderful to be here with all these wonderful speakers. I have the unenviable task of trying to provide some summary remarks after a really engaging panel. And as we've heard from today's panel, women are playing a significant role in the most important energy and environmental policy discussions around the world. But we've also heard how much work remains to be done to achieve gender parity in the energy and environmental sectors. I'm going to speak to this a little bit from the energy and environmental policy side. And as noted, I'm an environmental attorney in the US. So my remarks will skew a little more to that experience. Gender equity is inextricably linked with energy and environmental policy. Such policies have unique impacts of women, some of which we've already heard about. Women have also long been leaders in environmental and energy advocacy and continue to be, which is a very good thing because women's involvement in decision-making improves policy choices and outcomes. Yet, as we've discussed, women remain underrepresented in many areas of the energy and environmental policy in governments and the private sector, especially. So I'm going to talk a little bit about each of these issues separately, and then provide some sum up of what we've heard from our panelists. First, environmental and energy policy has unique impacts on women around the world. We've heard it in the discussion in the panel a few of the ways that happens. While energy and environmental policy may seem like it shouldn't necessarily have a gender dynamic, after all, these policies certainly affect us all. They really do have different impacts, distinct impacts on different communities, including on women. One of the classic examples often discussed in international development contexts is that improved energy access and electrification around the world can mean more freedom for women to pursue other economic opportunities that benefit themselves, their families, and communities. When reliable energy means no longer having to gather cooking and heating fuel, for example, it can also mean creating space to develop a home business, attend school, or work outside the home. This type of change has been shown to meaningfully contribute to the economy of a region or country. So also improving access to cleaner fuels and technologies. We've heard a lot about clean energy development today. This often has a disproportionate health benefit for women particularly in communities where they are primarily working in the home and making the decisions around energy access and fuel access. We know that climate change has unequal impacts, often harming already disadvantaged communities the most. This includes disproportionately harming women around the world. In some places, this is simply because of how climate change impacts access to natural resources. For example, water and fuel may decrease due to climate-related drought or become more scarce. And when women who are often responsible for those resources have to spend more of their time securing these basic needs, the economic development that we talked about may not happen. Continuing with this example, decisions around energy infrastructure development, if they don't take into account the different ways that members of a community use natural resources or access traditionally used spaces, they can have a negative impact on women, even if they have a positive impact on, for example, on the clean energy grid. So these are just a few examples of how environmental and energy policy can affect women distinctly, emphasizing the importance of recognizing that these differences exist and incorporating them into policy decisions. But I don't want to dwell on the vulnerabilities here. Women aren't just more vulnerable to negative climate and environmental impacts worldwide. They're also well situated to be leaders in improving policy decisions that mitigate and respond to these impacts. Women have and continue to be at the forefront of environmental and energy policy advocacy. They often take the lead in advocating against environmental harms in their communities. They have long been leaders on health and safety issues affecting their communities and families. Even before what we think of as the modern environmental movement, women led conservation efforts, advocated for better housing and work conditions, and fought for policies that ensured food products were safe. One of the events often pointed to as the birth of the modern environmental movement in the United States is the publishing of the book Silent Spring by Rachel Carson in the 1960s. This book galvanized a generation to focus on the issue of toxics in our environment. And along with the growing recognition at the time of the environmental damage from unchecked industrial activity in our communities, it helped spur political activism that ultimately, in many of the United States, foundational environmental laws. Women continue to show up as leaders in advocating for healthy environments today, whether by fighting for adequate sewer and waste infrastructure in communities long neglected by local and state officials, leading to significant harms in communities in the southern United States, for example, or calling for political leaders to take action to address already apparent climate impacts with smart adaptations, organizing against harmful waste management practices of large agricultural facilities like hog farming operations in North Carolina, or coming together as a national force for improved air quality and greenhouse gas emissions reductions, like the national advocacy group Moms Clean Air Force in the United States. These are all modern examples of women-led efforts to improve environmental and climate outcomes for their communities in the United States, and particularly in communities of color. I should pause to note here that, as I mentioned at the outset, my area of knowledge is as a United States environmental lawyer. So these examples are very much US-centric, but there are countless other examples around the world of women leaders in similar spaces. And as the United States and the world work to transition to cleaner technologies and cleaner energy infrastructure, women are leading the way there as well. We've heard a little bit about how, but also a little bit about some of the impediments to engaging with this new economy. But many of the clean energy associations in the United States are now led by women, working to get new industries off the ground and ensure policies prioritize climate concerns, environmental impacts, and the health of our communities. This is a very good thing because research shows that when women have input into environmental and energy policy decision-making, outcomes improve. The contributions of the women environmental advocates I mentioned are immeasurable, but they had to work for many years to get the appropriate attention of political leaders to address the issues facing their communities. It shouldn't have to be so hard. The more women we have in decision-making roles in government and in private sector, the better the outcomes can be. When women have the opportunity to meaningfully engage, policy choices get cleaner, more efficient, and improve the lives of their communities. And this engagement is necessary at all levels. We've talked a lot about the getting into these higher level decision-making roles, and that is one of the critical areas that we haven't quite cracked the code and we're working on. But really, this is true of all levels of policy engagement, from local siting decisions to national energy workforce and development policy to women's representation on corporate boards. Women's involvement in policymaking and economics improves climate outcomes. The UN has looked at various UN studies have found that women tend to make decisions about resource use and investments in the interest and welfare of their children, families, and communities. They build community resilience in the face of climate-related impacts because of their focus and their interests. They tend to make economic and political decisions that encourage improved access to public goods like energy and water and sanitation infrastructure, some of which we've already talked about, which help communities develop climate resilience and prepare for disasters. And as we saw earlier, the UN Sustainable Development Goals recognize that gender equity is essential to sustainable development and prioritize it as a standalone goal that also has important links to clean energy and environmental sustainability goals. How do we help women continue to make a difference and grow their impact at all levels? Well, this is, of course, the topic of the panel that we just heard. And as we know, women are still very much underrepresented in many areas, particularly in these important decision-making roles. Our earlier speakers highlighted some of these statistics. Gender-responsive research, government outreach, and policymaking are critical to improving these statistics. The design of policies must consider differing impacts on distinct portions of the population, including differences in their impacts by gender. But policy design must also actively seek input from women. This requires thoughtful outreach efforts. In the United States, many government action and around the world, many government actions require environmental assessments. Both public and private actors should seek out the input of women in the communities affected by their activities. You know, just from the conversation we were listening to, you could hear why that's so important, how some of that type of outreach would result in distinct and different responses and inputs into the decision-making process. You know, how a facility or a job access in an area might be different for a different experience for women versus men. How resources are used in different ways by women versus men in a community. If these things aren't incorporated early into project development, they aren't considered, and policy development, they aren't considered enough, and they aren't allowed to help improve the overall decision-making and outcome of the project. And it's not only because it's the right thing to do, but it's also because we know that it results in better policies and project engagement. Women are natural leaders in their communities, particularly when it comes to energy use and environmental concerns. You know, we heard a number of insights from our panel about how we can address some of these issues. I just want to list a few that I took note of as the panelists were speaking. You know, in taking intentional steps to train and upskill and promote women, and the urgency for doing that right now, where we have an opportunity to really make a difference, and we have industries that are growing and changing in the clean energy and broader energy sector. The transparency and disclosure on these issues was mentioned, such as required disclosure of gender equity in the energy sector. And that is a motivating factor for companies and the utility industry to focus on these issues. Taking proactive efforts and steps to address the gender pay gap, including supportive regulation that encourages gender parity in corporate work cultures. Keeping the flexible benefits that evolved and developed during the COVID pandemic, but developed more widely then, without the extra expectations of being always on or responsive in ways that can disrupt women's lives and responsibilities outside of work. Each of these are some of the many insights we gathered from our panel about different ways that we can address these issues. And I'd like to end on a note about women's professional networking organizations. This was also discussed a little bit in our previous panel, As women continue to move into new professional spaces and rise in corporate and government hierarchies, women's networks can play a crucial role in supporting this rise. As was mentioned, I'm on the board of the Women's Council on Energy and the Environment and have been involved with the organization for much of my legal career. As a nonpartisan, nonprofit, policy neutral organization, it's been an excellent space to meet women and engage with experts in a whole range of related roles that are distinct from my work and provide me the opportunity to engage with women addressing these issues from all sides and in all different types of work. Organizations like USEA can provide opportunities for women to learn from each other, develop networks across specialties with women in adjacent but distinct professions, and provide a flat platform for women to display their expertise in presentations and panels. This network has been important in my career in those ways, and there are a growing number of women-oriented professional organizations in the energy and environmental sectors. So I would encourage everyone to actively participate and support these organizations as they try to help promote and provide space for women in traditionally male-dominated areas. And with that, I will close and say thank you to all of our panelists and our speakers from earlier for their wonderful insights.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Hannah. I don't know how we are good on time. Your presentation, Hannah, was excellent, engaging, and the verdict is clear. Clearly, after that panel discussion and after all this remarks that we've heard today, and Hannah, your presentation, we can double down on bridging the gender gap if we start prioritizing gender equity. To come in and close big is my dear colleague and Senior Program Director at the United States Energy Association, Marjorie Jean-Pierre. Marjorie is responsible for managing and implementing partnership activities in Central, South, and Southeast Asia, Latin America, and Caribbean, and Africa, leading the Energy Utility Partnership Program. She leads our team and is serving USEA for the past 30 years. In the past, she has also served in the US Army. Marjorie, please take over.
Thank you so much, Ipshita. I am Marjorie Jean-Pierre, Senior Program Director at USEA, and I must say I have thoroughly enjoyed this dialogue today. Let me start by thanking everyone present with us here today from Central Asia, South Asia, Southeast Asia, the United States, Europe, Africa, and other parts of the world. It appears we have time traveled today for our shared responsibility to embrace equity. In this decisive decade of climate action and energy transformation, this program managed to successfully address two critical issues in the energy sector: investment in women's labor force participation and leadership in the energy sector, and energy access and the role of policy in this equation to achieve equity. Access to energy is critical to support women's equality, and there can be no debate on achieving equality till equity is first achieved. I am sure we all agree that the energy sector is in desperate need of a transformed workplace with more women in senior leadership and management. Until we embrace equity, disadvantaged and marginalized communities will continue to be overburdened by pollution, underinvestment in clean energy infrastructure, and lack of access to energy efficient housing, clean cooking, cleaner air, transportation, and in some cases, just a basic human right of being connected to power. And we've had real life evidence of the situation from a galaxy of champions of change in today's forum. You have been a tremendous audience, engaged and attentive, and while we are not able to take your questions today, we will try to address some of those in future sessions. So again, thank you for participating. Thank you, Sheila, for leading this program and embracing equity every day at work. Your leadership encourages a domino effect of embracing gender equity. Thank you, Ms. Damilola Ogunbanyi from C4All, Sustainable Energy for All, for your inspiring keynote address, championing the Sustainable Development Goal 7, access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy. You reiterated how gender equality is at the heart of all C4All work and how crucial it is for systemic changes to meet Sustainable Development Goals overall. Even though you cannot make it in person today, your message was very clear. Kristen, thank you for championing the significance of gender equity as a cross-cutting priority for USAID's programming and development agenda both for energy and climate. Decarbonization cannot be achieved without the equitable participation of women and marginalized communities. I want to thank our distinguished panel, Commissioner Clements, Samantha, Cora, and Flavia, and our panel chair, R.T. Khosla, for the engaging conversation that covered the impact of COVID-19 and the challenges women have been facing since, stories of strategic and policy push for successful outcomes, enabling frameworks and organizations to make gender equity a priority in technical and leadership roles, steps to charter change management roadmaps with a culture of equity as a priority across work streams, as well as everyone's top 3 recommended practical actions to support diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. Hannah, thank you for threading your presentation to the panel, prioritizing the importance of gender equity through the climate and energy policy lens, and also touching upon the importance of professional women's networks. I cannot leave today, however, without thanking the wonderful USEA team. For over 3 decades, USEA has been partnering with energy utilities around the world to increase women's participation and training in all of our capacity building programs and to help workforce diversification. Today's program seemed like an apt culmination of a lot of the groundwork we put in, and this is just the beginning of more action to follow. I thank my colleagues Ipshita, Sarah, and Peter for running the show today and pulling a great program together. In the next couple of weeks, we will be sharing a recording of the event and relevant excerpts from the panel discussion and the responses to the survey included in the registration. Earlier, we said that we will be sending out a fact sheet. In actuality, we'll be pulling the inputs together and we'll be sending out a gender equity best practices information sheet that will be shared with all attendees of the dialogue after the event. Your responses from the registration will remain anonymous and will not be attributed. Again, I want to thank you for joining us, and I wish everyone a happy International Women's Day.
Thank you, Marjorie, so much. And Ipshita too. Fantastic, wonderful program. And I know that it's going to have a strong afterlife to go on and create and also be available to people to think about and to move back into their worlds and to share their time and effort. Today means a lot to us.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day, afternoon, evening, night.
Thank you for joining us.
Day.
Happy
Thank you.
Women's Day.
Thank you. Happy Women's Day.
Happy Women's Day. Thank you again.
Thank you.